So I want to start off by saying thank you everyone for coming. My name is Cody Armstrong, and today we're going to focus on the essentials of Onshape. So really intended for those maybe with a bit of CAD experience, but just getting started in Onshape, trying to get a handle on, how our features work. How do we create sketches and parts and assemblies and drawings and so on. And so a very high level overview of Onshape, really going to cover a lot of the different, essentials for those that are just getting, just getting their feet wet, just getting started. As I always say with these webinars, I really encourage you to ask any questions that you'd like. So you have a questions dialogue and you go to webinar panel, feel free to type anything in. I'll do my best from time to time to stop and address any questions that have come up. So again, feel free. If I don't answer your question, I'll stick around and make sure that all the questions are addressed before I end things today. So just keep in mind, feel free to type in any questions. So as we're going through this, there are a few things I want to point out, and there are a few things at first that I always like to point out to new users, and that's, if you're not familiar with our goals and our missions with Onshape. The first is our mission statement, and that is getting everyone working together with CAD on any device, anywhere. And so if you haven't used Onshape's mobile apps, they're really groundbreaking tools in terms of CAD. For the first time, you can use your iPhone or your iPad as a true CAD creation tool and not a viewer, right, or a markup tool. You have real sketching and feature creation capabilities, real assembly, all on a mobile device. So if you have an iPad, iPhone, Android tablet, Android phone, definitely check out the Onshape apps. They're free, full-fledged CAD creation tools. But this also means any device, and this includes a lot of desktops that are out there. So Linux, Mac, Windows, Chromebooks. You can access your CAD data from any one of these machines. So everyone working together with CAD on any device, anywhere, that's our goal. Now, some things I like to point out about Onshape in general, we do consider ourselves professional 3D CAD. And when you think of professional 3D CAD, it's really three pieces. You have parts, assemblies, and of course, drawings. And we do have all three major pieces that make up a professional 3D CAD system. One thing that's very unique about Onshape is how fast these three pieces are evolving. So unlike a traditional CAD system where you have maybe a couple of updates a year and one big major update, Onshape updates roughly every 3 weeks with new functionality being added. And the neatest thing about it is it requires no effort from the user. You just log in and you see new functionality. So very neat, and you'll see Onshape evolve very quickly because of this nature. So parts, assemblies, and drawings, we have all three major pieces. We're going to cover all three today, a very high level. Also worth pointing out with Onshape is built-in version control. So again, unlike a traditional CAD system where you have files you have to manage, with Onshape we have documents, and the version control of those documents is built in. The functionality is built in. So you don't have to have a separate data management software to manage your data. In Onshape, all that functionality is built into the core. The next thing on my list, especially important if you've come from another CAD system, is the ability to read and write common CAD formats that are out there today. So STEP, IGES, Parasolid, ACES, SolidWorks, Inventor, a number of different formats that you can both import and export. So it makes it a great tool to store your CAD data. It makes it a great tool to collaborate with CAD data. Maybe you're building something natively in SolidWorks, but you want to be able to share it with the machine shop. You can use Onshape for that. It's also a great tool, again, for the export scenario because now I don't need to send someone a certain file. If I share my document with them, they can export it in whatever format they prefer. So it works really well alongside existing CAD systems as well as, of course, being your dedicated CAD system. So read and write common CAD formats, very important for those coming from other CAD systems or if you have a library of CAD data that you want to be able to store in Onshape. The last thing I want to mention is entirely new methods of collaboration. If you haven't tried sharing your document yet, there's a big share icon in the top right corner in Onshape in your document. You can share it very easily. And all you need is their email address, define their permissions, and you're good to go. They don't even have to have an Onshape account. We create one on the fly for them. So it's very easy to share your document. And with Onshape, we have real-time collaboration between users. We have things like dedicated comment capabilities integrated into Onshape, things like follow mode, very useful for seeing each other's screens. So all kinds of really impressive collaboration tools that are all kind of built off of the idea of sharing. A question, can I export to DWG format if my recipient doesn't have an Onshape account? You can certainly export. If you have an Onshape account, you can, anything that you've done on either a sketch or a drawing can be exported to a DWG, of course. The person that you're sending to, if they don't have an Onshape account, they'll need to create one to see your Onshape document, and then export if you give them that permission. So it's an important thing to point out. You, if you have an Onshape account, can export. Okay, so moving on, enough of this. What are we going to talk about today? And really today is about, as I mentioned, the essentials. We're going to tour the interface. That's going to be a big part of today. How do we get around? Where are the toolbars? What are the important pieces of the interface? And then we're going to get into building a part. Real simple part, of course, for time. We're going to stick to the basics. So we're going to build a simple part and we're going to assemble it. We're going to discuss, on a broad level, our assemblies, our different mate types, and how we get around in assemblies. And of course, the last step in the process is always creating a drawing. And so that's going to be what we do. We're going to create a simple drawing, front, top, right, isometric, standard orthogonal drawing. So kind of the day in the life of an Onshape user at a very simple level. Now, the last thing I want to mention is showing how to import. It's a very simple thing to do. In fact, it's just an icon on the documents page, but I always like to point it out, especially for those that have come from another CAD system. So as I mentioned before, feel free to type in any questions that you'd like. I'll do my best to stop from time to time and then make sure to address them. So throughout this, I'll do my best to answer any questions. Okay, so I have one last slide for you, and then we're going to jump into it. What are 5 things to remember? So if you had to leave this webinar with just 5 things, the key things to remember from it. The first thing is Onshape runs entirely in a browser. There's no installs in terms of, your computer. Your laptop, your desktop, you can access your Onshape data from anywhere as long as you have your username and password. It runs entirely in a browser, and it runs in a modern browser. So Chrome, Firefox, Safari, Opera. One thing to keep in mind is it does not run well in Internet Explorer, and that's a key thing. If you're using Internet Explorer, you'll probably want to switch to a different browser type that's better supported. Things like Chrome, Firefox, Safari, and so on. So Onshape runs in a browser. There is no install. A document, and we're going to go over a document in just a second, is a project container. And I think that's one of the most common misconceptions. When you're getting started, a document is not a single CAD model. A document is think of it as a container for your entire project. So if I was designing, for instance, a motorcycle, let's say, I would put the entire motorcycle design in one document. All the wheels, the frame, the engine, everything would be in one document. So think of a document as a container for your entire project. As many parts, assemblies, and even miscellaneous files as you'd like can be stored in a document. So a document is a project container. The next thing is we have different tabs in the interface. I'm going to go over this in just a second with the interface, but you'll see in Onshape across the bottom different tabs in your document. And each tab has a purpose. So we have tabs for parts, tabs for doing assemblies, tabs for drawings, and even tabs for miscellaneous data that you've imported. So different tabs for each different element, so to speak, of your document or your project. The last 2 things to mention are sharing and collaboration are built in, and data management is built in. So you don't have to have a separate data management application to manage your CAD models. And sharing is a few clicks. And there's no sending emails back and forth with files attached to them or sending links to Dropbox or anything like that. You can work together in real time. There's no check-in, check-out, or who has right permissions or all those issues go away. So very important things to keep in mind. I think, if I had to, list 5 things to remember just to take from this webinar, those are the key things. So enough of that. Let's dig into Onshape. Now, the first thing I want to mention is, as I mentioned before, it runs entirely in a browser. So here I'm running Chrome, and this is on a Mac, by the way. So I'm running Chrome on a Mac. Again, you could be running Windows, Linux, Chromebooks. Any of those will work. A question, good question. Can you copy a tab content to another document? You can copy part studios to other documents. So if I had a part, I can right-click the tab and copy it. And we'll go over that in just a bit. But yes, the answer is yes. You'll see a copy to clipboard option when right-clicking a tab. Does the viewer need Onshape to view shared files? And the answer is yes. Now, when you share with someone, we automatically create an account and send them a link. They'll still need to, create a password and create the actual account, but once they do, they'll be taken straight to your document. So the first time you share with someone that doesn't have an Onshape account, we create one for them and then send them a link. We try and make it as easy as possible to get in. But it is needed to view the models. So, and that's today, one thing again unique about Onshape is that we're evolving very quickly, and the need for sharing a model view only and not creating an account, we understand. That's something that we're working on. So, how do fastener libraries work with project containers? This is a good question. Things like nuts and bolts libraries, for instance, and there's a few ways to handle this. I've seen users import their own library if they have it. But most users today are using the App Store to accomplish this. The App Store has a direct link to a huge, huge library called Trace Parts of nuts and bolts. Literally hundreds of millions of CAD models of different library components, what you might call them. Most users today are using the App Store Trace Parts app to bring those things in. You can also import them if you have your library of your own. So. A good question. Why did you decide to use the term document as the project container? I feel the term document has a long-standing context in understanding this artifact that describes a single aspect. It's something that it was a very long discussion, I would say, in terms of document versus project, and that there is a logic behind the reasoning behind document. It's more about our long-term goals for a document, and a document not being just a so-called container, but more of a management system for all things, everything project related. So there's more to it that we hope to integrate into document management soon that will kind of round out documents in general and more justify the term. I don't want to get into too specific a detail, so forgive me, but there is a reason behind document as a name. I do know that. So. Importable file types, OBJ, DXF. Yes, DXF can. OBJ cannot natively be translated to Onshape. So you'll need to use, there's an app in the App Store called InStep that will translate a mesh model like an OBJ or an STL to a BREP model that you can import natively into Onshape. So there is a step involved for mesh models like STL and OBJ. It's an app called InStep that's in the App Store. But DXFs you can import natively. Step, IGES, Parasolid, DWGs. There's quite a long list that's very easy to import. So. Okay, so moving on. When we talk about Onshape running in a browser, again, it's just another tab in your document. When you create an account, one of the first things that you'll be taken to is your documents page. And you can bookmark the URL if you'd like, but it's cad.onshape.com. So that's the URL. And when you first log in, you'll be taken to your documents page. A question that's come up. Are you talking about the Apple Mac App Store? Absolutely not. I'm talking about the Onshape App Store. So by the way, for those new users, when you first log into your documents page, at the bottom left corner, there's a button to the App Store. This is the Onshape App Store for things like rendering or importing mesh data or all kinds of different stuff. Finite element analysis, CAM, there's all kinds of neat apps to check out. I don't want to get too distracted with the App Store. A lot of capabilities are built in there. But it's definitely worth checking out. We've done a different webinar. We have videos on the App Store, but here's the link to it if you want to get into it a little bit more detail. Can you import native CATIA assembly? I believe we can. I know we can import CATIA parts. I'm not certain about assemblies. Forgive me. I don't think CATIA assemblies natively will come in. I'm not 100% sure, so forgive me, but I'm pretty certain it's just parts. Again, not 100% sure, so forgive me. Why not folder instead of document? In general, think a lot of web apps in general avoid folder. But again, yeah, I think the document name is going to make more sense in the future when you start integrating a lot more of the data management and aspects of this to Onshape. So all right, so let's get started. Now, as I mentioned before, as you first create an account, you're going to log into what you call a documents page, which you can access from cad.onshape.com. And of course, it just takes you to a list of your documents, right? So I can scroll up and down in the list. Very simple thing. If I select them, I get some metadata and a preview on the right here, so I can see who owns it, who last edited it, what times, and so on. I can select different ones in the list, and you'll have options to things like delete and to share and so on. You also have filters on the left. So I have filters like recently opened or my documents, right? Or created by me, shared with me. We also have in Onshape the idea of team. So I can share with multiple people in a team all at once. And so I have a few teams here for tech marketing and consulting and so on. So all these different ways to categorize my data based on the company I belong to, for instance, or the team I belong to. But more important, I think, to the new user is the public and tutorials and samples. These are great references if you're looking to figure out how to model something, for example. So here, if I go through the list of public documents, there's pneumatic cylinders and U-bolts and simple parts. But if you're looking to get started, the neat thing about this is you can see how they were modeled. So I can go through the feature list and look at it. I can even copy these documents and modify them if I wanted to. So public documents, a great resource. If you don't have any proprietary design, you're not concerned about sharing your models, make them public. It's a great way for others to learn from each other. So public documents, a great list. A lot of different documents in here, but a great way to go out, figure out how others have done things. The tutorials are a little more specific. A lot of what we're going to cover here today would be covered in the tutorials. Here's the toolbar. Here's the basics of building a part, an assembly, and then creating a drawing. But another great resource if you're looking for like a video walkthrough and maybe some different model examples. Tutorials are a great reference for that. So that's the filters on the left. The last one I want to point out is the trash. Very straightforward. When you first, remove something, you're actually just moving it to the trash. It's important to keep in mind that from time to time you will need to come in here and empty the trash in order to purge all those, unused documents. So just keep that in mind when you do remove something. You're actually moving it to the trash, and there's one more step to empty it. All right. So the filters on the left, I mentioned the App Store. So you have the App Store link here. Now, the important icons are more on the top left. We have Create, of course, to create a brand new document, and then Import. Right, I mentioned before, I want to walk you through the import. It's very simple. You select Import, and you browse to the file you'd like to import. You can import anything into a document. So any file extension can be imported as a tab and stored in a document. A lot of file extensions can be rendered natively, and we already talked about many of them: Step, IGES, Parasolid, SolidWorks, and so on. But also things like PDFs, text files, videos, images. You can see them right inside of Onshape. So importing is very simple. Just select it and browse, and then select import. You also, of course, have search. Very simple search, right? I can search by mountain. Right, finds mountain key, mountain bike frame is my document here. So I can go through and search very quickly by a keyword search. The last thing I want to mention before I get out of the documents page is the icons on the top right here. So a few things to point out. We have notifications. So we have different notifications depending on your import status and different things to notify you of various things in Onshape. We also have an invite friends and share. So if you know of someone that might like Onshape, you can click invite friends, type in their email address, and hit share, and they get sent a link to join Onshape. So very easy way to share with someone that you think might like Onshape. Also, sharing your document, and I covered this a little bit earlier. It's very simple. In this case, I have the mountain bike frame selected. If I hit share, I'm sharing that document. I can enter their email address, define their permissions, and I'm good to go. And I'm going to walk through an example of this in just a bit. But it's very easy to share your document. But I think the last two are especially important, and especially the help menu. For the new user, if you select the question mark here, you'll see help, which is a very great resource for learning different functionality, what's needed for each command and things like that. Help is a great resource, links to our video library and tutorials. Also the forums, the Onshape forums, a great resource for getting questions answered. And a list of our keyboard shortcuts. Another commonly asked question. Do you have keyboard shortcuts and where can I find them? Here they are under the help menu. And lastly, you have the feedback tool. Now, the feedback tool is very useful for giving us feedback. You can mark up the screen. You can do all kinds of neat things to show us what you're trying to show us. Enter in some text, hit send, and it automatically creates a ticket. We don't need any other information besides, the info you want to give us. The text, the screenshot maybe if you want to. So feedback mechanism built right into Onshape, very easy to use. And it's a closed loop system. So once you submit feedback, your issues attached to a ticket. Your ticket is, email notification, so you'll get notified when it's resolved. It's a very clean system, an easy way to give us feedback. And we really wanted to build an easy mechanism to get user feedback. So this is it, especially useful for those just getting started in Onshape. All right, the very last one, then we're going to get into some modeling, the manage account settings. So these are your account settings for Onshape. The important things I always like to point out are things like preferences. A commonly asked question, how do I change the default units of every document? It defaults to inch. I always use metric. Well, you can change that here. And every future document will have different units. So you can change the default units. You can add a different email address. One important one I always like to point out is two-factor authentication is also an option. So two-factor authentication is very similar to logging into your bank, for example. They require some other form of authentication, text message or something to that effect. Onshape has a very similar thing. We have two-factor authentication, just adds an extra layer of security to your account. You can also list devices and applications and subscription options, and I'm not going to go into too great a detail about this, but I just wanted to point out account settings in general. If you're looking for how to, is there a account level setting for something, this is the place to go. All right, so let's jump back to the documents page and get started. Now, as I mentioned before, if you're brand new to Onshape and you're just looking to get started building your first part, the create icon is where to get started. That'll create a new blank document and you can start sketching and building your features. But in my case, I've already done a bit of modeling and I have this mountain bike frame that I've already opened. And one thing I want to point out is you'll notice that it's just another tab in my browser. So you can have as many tabs open for Onshape as you'd like. And another commonly asked question is, do you have multi-monitor support, for example? And the answer is yes. You just disconnect a tab and move it to a different monitor. All right, and you can see things live update just because of the nature of Onshape. So it's kind of a byproduct of being built in the browser. So you have things like duplicate, and you can have as many tabs open as you'd like, and you can tile them and do all the things you'd prefer to do. So in this case, I've already done some modeling. I have the mountain bike frame nearly complete, but there are some things I want to model, and namely, I want to model a link to join the swing arm to my frame. There are a few things I want to point out when we first get started here, and that is first, of course, the interface. We're no longer in the documents page, which is a list of our documents. We're in an actual document. So some key things, but this is really where we get our work done, right? So I can do, different functions like rename or add mates or insert parts or all the things you'd expect to do. Some key things about the interface that I want to point out. Starting at the top, and we'll start at the top left corner here, we have close document. So if you click the Onshape logo, it takes you right back to the documents page. Okay, important thing to keep in mind, it closes the document. The next one to that is the documents menu. I mentioned before rename. You can also copy a document from this menu as well and change the units. This is another good, how do I change the units of a specific document? That option is here. So that's the documents menu. One thing I want to point out about the interface as I get into the next icon here, which is the versions and history, is that you will not find a save icon in Onshape. There is no save. Everything you do in Onshape is saved. And that's visible when you go into the history. So you can see if I expand out the history here, every little change to this document has been stored. And I can go back to any one of these points and restore back to that moment. So you don't have to be concerned about, I only have 10 undo steps, and if I go beyond that, I'm in trouble because my model's messed up. I don't have to worry about that. I can go back all the way to the moment this document was created, and every little step in it is stored as a moment in my history. So this is a bit of the version control I was telling you about earlier. Every little change is tracked. There's no save. You don't have to ever worry about saving. And we also have major version control. And what I mean by that is think of major milestones, revisions, often referred to, revision A, revision B, where I may want to go back and look at that state. What did the model look at that state? And that's a great use of versions. So we have history, which tracks everything. And then we have versions, which track major milestones, major revisions. All right, so moving on, that's versions in history. We, of course, have the document name. Moving over to the right here, I have a debug icon. This is specific to Onshape employees for different troubleshooting things. But moving on, we have comments, a great way to communicate with those that are shared in the document, or even just to store notes. I can add just simple text in here. But comment capabilities are integrated. You can even attach comments to parts and faces and so on. I have notifications I mentioned before, and a big share icon. As I mentioned, I'm going to go over this in just a bit, but it's very easy to share. And then we have help and manage account, which I've already shown you. So those are kind of the administrative tools across the very top of the interface. Now we get into a lot of the nitty-gritty, right? The details necessary to build the assembly. And the first is the toolbar. So just below that are the toolbars, right? And you have one toolbar depending on what you're doing. So in this case, I'm in an assembly. This bike frame is an assembly. So I have assembly tools, insert parts, all the different mates to assemble this. I have different relations as well, tangent mate, all the different things that we can do in our assemblies. It's important to keep in mind that this changes, though. So if I'm in a part and I'm creating features, this toolbar will look different, right? If I'm in a sketch, for instance, this toolbar will look different. So it will change depending on the environment you're in and what you're doing. Question, can we rearrange the toolbar icons? And the answer is no, not yet. That is something that we're looking for, more flexibility in our toolbars and things, but you can't move around individual icons within the toolbar as of yet. You can move different pieces of the interface, so I can move the feature list, for example. I can move the cube in the same way, but I can't yet reorganize tools in the toolbar. All right, so the toolbar, again, specific to what you're doing. So if I'm in an assembly, you'll see assembly tools. If I'm in a drawing, you'll see drawing creation tools, views tools, and dimension tools, and so on. So that's the toolbar, a very important piece of the interface. Then we have the feature list. Now, the feature list, if you're familiar with a lot of other traditional CAD applications, it's very similar. It's really a history of all the different things that you've inserted on all the, in this case, mates that I use to assemble this. Your feature list in your part is going to have sketches and features that construct that part. So again, very similar to a lot of traditional CAD applications. If you don't have exposure to those, just think of it really as a history of all the different things that you've added to the assembly or the part or the drawing to construct it. So that is your feature list. As I mentioned before, you can move it up and down. You can scroll up and down within it. You also have very important options like hide and show. You have right-click menu options, so definitely worth checking out. Question, is it correct to say that the workflow is create a part, form of assembly of parts, then create drawing of the parts? Absolutely. In general, the workflow, I think, I can say this with confidence, for most, if not all 3D CAD systems out there today, is first to start with your part, build a combination of parts, whether you do that in an assembly or with a single multi-part, that's fine. And then create a drawing of that. Is absolutely the workflow, yes. Another question, does Onshape support 3D connection devices? Yes, if you, at least for Windows, I should say, and I should say that with a caveat. So yes, for Windows, you'll want to make sure to download the latest 3D connection driver for your device from the 3D connection website. As long as you're running Windows, it should work just fine. You should work just as a many traditional CAD apps, but you will need the latest driver from 3D connection. And hopefully soon we'll have a Mac version for those Mac users out there as well. All right, so as I mentioned before, we have the feature list on the left. Again, think of it as a history, or you can think of it as a timeline where all the different things that you've inserted are listed there. You can go there to edit and hide and do all the things that you'd expect. Now, I've already briefly shown you it, but it's a big tip that I have for all new users, and that is the right-click menu. If you're unsure of something, if you don't know, how do I hide this part or how do I edit this, try right-clicking it. You have a lot of context-sensitive options. So if I right-click a part, for instance, I get hide other, which hides everything else, right? So show the mates, switch to, which will switch to the part studio. So you have all kinds of neat stuff in the right-click menu. I definitely recommend it for the new user. If you're trying to find something, try right-clicking the thing that you're trying to work with and see what options are there. So that's the feature list. We have the view cube here on the top right. This gives you simple orientation tools. So front, top, right. I can even select the corners and go into different orientations there. So you have all kinds of different options. I can index the arrows around or rotate. So if you're looking for a very fine degree of control outside of the standard mouse rotate, you can do that. I think the most important thing I always like to point out here is the different render modes. So you have options like shaded without edges, or let's rotate things a bit here. Hidden edges visible, another commonly requested one, or translucent, where I have a different translucent display. Another commonly asked question, where is section view? It's also under this cube. So that's our section view tool. But different render modes, very important, I think, for a lot of users. How do I display it differently? So, all right. Now, that is the view cube. Now, the last thing I wanted to point out with the interface. So there's really 4 pieces that are critical. You have the toolbar, you have the feature list, you have the view cube, all of which we've covered. The last important piece is the tabs across the bottom. So remember, a document is a combination of different things. This is the bike. I'm working on a bike. Here's the assembled frame. But there are different tabs here. So if I switch a tab, if I go to the Fox here, you'll see I have a shock. And this is a part studio. And it's an important distinction. So this is where I do my part modeling. Notice the toolbar. I have extrude, revolve, sweep, loft, the tools you'd expect to create parts. So this is a part studio where I do my sketching and my feature creation. I have several part studios here. So this is actually the dog bone link that we're going to model over something very similar to this. I'm going to build a simple example of this part. Then we have the frame assembly. We have even imported models. So here is a SolidWorks part that was imported, the swing arm. So I can switch tabs here. This was imported from SolidWorks, and I'm using it in my design. So, and I also mentioned before, it's not just CAD data. You can import anything into a document. Here's a PDF I'm storing inside of the document, right? It could be PDFs, it could be text files, images, videos, whatever you'd like to store, you can inside of a document, right? And I can even go up and down and view this, natively inside of Onshape. So documents are useful for a number of different things outside of, just CAD. Okay, so I mentioned before that I want to build a simple part. The last thing I want to do before I get into actually building is the rotate, pan, and zoom. 3 kind of key pieces to manipulating your model in Onshape. So the first is rotate. And the rotate, you hold down the right mouse and drag around. Right? So hold down the right mouse and drag gives you rotate. Now, if you hold down Control and then right mouse and drag, you get pan. However, if your mouse has a middle wheel, a physical wheel, some do, some don't, if you have that wheel, you can push that down and it will also pan. So if you hold that down and move, it will also pan. The last, of course, is zoom. Now, zoom is scroll in and scroll out. The key thing to keep in mind is it scrolls to wherever the cursor is. So move the cursor over what you want to zoom in on and then scroll your mouse wheel. All right, so a few questions. What is the value of keeping the import tab along with the tabs that are imported? And the idea behind, for instance, this SolidWorks part as just a tab is it's backed up. I can go in and download this in the future. I can even version control that SolidWorks part. So I can hit save version, update the SolidWorks part with a new version, and track the differences between them. So there's all kinds of neat capabilities. We leave the tab deliberately so that you can quickly download it again, restore back if maybe you just want to use Onshape as a cloud storage service, or if you want to translate it, if I want to export it to a different format. A good question, though, and very much ties into the last one. After importing the SolidWorks file, can we delete that tab? And the answer is yes. You don't need this. This is not linked to the tab. You can delete it if you'd like, if you don't need just the tab for the SolidWorks part in this case. All right, so jumping back, I want to start building some features here. So let's get started now. The important thing is I want to build something similar to this dog bone link, a couple of simple sketches, and I want to get started in a new part studio. I'm going to create a new blank part. Now to do this, I go to the Create tab menu in the bottom left corner, left click, and select Create Part Studio. Right, I select Create Part Studio, and it creates a new blank part. And that, by the way, is the same whether it's a part, assembly, or a drawing. You can create right from the Create tab menu. Now that I've created a new blank part, you'll notice I get the default 3 planes, top, front, and right, and an origin. So again, if you've come from a traditional CAD system, going to be a very familiar environment. So now I can start sketching. The first thing to keep in mind with your sketch is where do I want to place it? And in my case, I'm going to start on the front plane. So I select front plane, I hit sketch, and now I'm in a sketch on the front plane. And all I did was left click and then select the sketch icon from the toolbar. Now an important thing is I need to rotate this sketch plane so that I'm looking normal to it. And that command can be done a few different ways, but again, the right-click menu is an area here where it's really going to save me. I can right-click, view normal to sketch plane. That will rotate the sketch plane around, and now I'm looking normal to it. And now I can start sketching. Okay, I'm going to start with a simple circle. Important thing to point out, though, notice the icons have changed. Right, so I don't have feature creation tools. Now I have sketch tools, lines, arcs, splines, and so on. I want to start with a simple circle. One last thing to point out is you do have drop-down menus. So just keep in mind that often many of these tools have variations. So definitely worth checking out. I'll select center point circle, move my cursor down, and as I move it around, you'll notice I start to get these inferences to the origin. In this case, I want to place the circle on the origin. So I move my cursor over it, left click, move my cursor out, left click again, and I can create my circle. So very simple. All right, so a few questions that have come up. Please support importing of STL files. That's definitely something that's on the horizon for us, but keep in mind that InStep does it today, so there is an app in the App Store that will do it today if you need a solution that works today. Another question. I have Onshape running in another browser window currently. I can't see the toolbar with the actions, sketch, and so on. If you don't see a toolbar at all, one thing I would keep in mind, are you using Internet Explorer? If not, I'm not certain what. You might use the feedback tool and submit it. That's an odd one. Is the webinar recorded? Yes, we will post this webinar. Anyone who registered for it will get a link to the recording as well later. So, another good question. Can I immediately put a dimension in just as the circle is created? The answer is yes. If you left click and place the dimension, if you right after that enter a value, you will get, it will constrain it to that value. So yes, you can punch in a value right after that. Okay, so I've added my first simple circle. Now, the thing to keep in mind about this is notice that the inside of the circle is shaded slightly differently than the outside, graphics here. And the idea behind that is anything that's in closed contour, like this circle, is shaded. So any closed contours are automatically shaded. And the idea is just to indicate that it is closed, right? Sometimes if you're creating complex geometry, it's not always clear that if your geometry is a closed loop or not, a closed contour. So I want one more circle. I'm going to move my cursor up here to the origin. Notice I get that reference to the origin. We'll left click, and now I have two circles in place. Now what I'd like to do is add just a few dimensions here. So I'm going to select the dimension tool from the toolbar, left click a circle, then left click where I'd like to place that circle, or excuse me, dimension, and then enter my value. In this case, 25. Okay. Notice the entire sketch scales to match that first dimension. So this circle also changed to match that first value. A question that's come up, can you use a formula for dimensions, i.e. this dimension equals this times this? And the answer is yes. And what I recommend, we're not going to cover it in this webinar, is looking up variables in Onshape. Variables give you a lot of control where you can do math, this dimension times this divided by that. You can do all kinds of neat things. You can do simple math in the dialog. So I can say 3/4, for instance. But variables allow me to link to other dimensions, which gives me a lot of power. So yes, I would look up variables to accomplish it. So we've entered our first dimension. We've defined this circle. Notice that the circle on the left is black. The circle on the right is blue. Right? So we have a fully defined circle indicated by the black color and an underdefined circle on the right. And you may ask, well, what's underdefined mean? There's no dimension for the diameter. We have no idea what size that circle is. And we have no idea what the distance is from this center point. So it is not fully defined. And your goal should be with each sketch, again, much like many traditional CAD applications, to fully define your sketches. So I'm going to do this one more time. We'll select the circle, left click, we'll enter 20. Now I want to define the distance between the two circles. Left click the center point, and we have a value of 85. Okay. So now notice that the circle on the right is black. It's fully defined. Another good question, is there a scripting interface? No, not yet, but stay tuned. I don't want to get into too many specific details, but not yet. Stay tuned. Hopefully soon. Okay, so I've created two simple circles. What I want to do next is draw lines that close this shape in. Remember, our goal with this is to create something similar to this dog bone link. Right? So we have two circles on the end, but it's joined with these two lines. So jumping back to our part, we need to construct two lines going across, but I want them centered. Right? So I want to start with a line going down the middle that's sole purpose is construction. And the question often comes up, can we create construction geometry? And the answer is yes. Select any of the sketch tools. In this case, I'll select line. Then left click the construction button. And then anything you draw is construction geometry. And for those not familiar with it, construction geometry is ignored when we go to create a feature. It's just there for your construction. So I'll left click a line, and I want to join a line between these two circle center points. Right? So I just drew a line from point to point. And the big thing there is that line now represents the middle of my part. So now I can go back to line, draw another line, left click on the circle, left click, and we have the first half of our rectangle or closed contour here. However, I want to mirror this line to the other side. I don't want to simply just draw another line. Right? I can do that, but then I don't get the symmetry that I'd expect. So what I'd like to show you is a command called mirror. You select mirror in the toolbar, select the construction line you want to mirror about, then select the geometry you want to mirror. Okay? So now it mirrors it about that construction line that I sketched. And the neat thing about this is when you left click and drag, notice the symmetry. Those lines remain centered over that construction line. Okay. So now all I have to do is add a simple dimension. Let's throw in a dimension here. 16. And again, I'm back to a fully defined sketch. Okay. I'm going to add two last circles. We'll do circle here and circle here. And we'll add a few dimensions. Now, I want these circles to be the same diameter. Now, I can dimension both of them separately, but that means if I change it, I need to change it in two places. You can also constrain these, and it's a very important point. It ties into a question that's come in. How would you turn off the symmetry from the last example? All of these are constraints, and there's a little checkbox here for show constraints. You'll see a number of symmetric constraints being added with that mirror. So deleting those constraints would delete the symmetry. In my case, I want to make this circle equal with this circle. So I left click each one and I select equal from the toolbar. Now both circles have the same diameter. So if I resize one, I resize both. So now we can add a dimension. It should be 12. And again, back to a fully defined sketch. Now, the constraints, by the way, they tend to get cumbersome, especially with complex sketches. You may not want them always on. Unchecking them is an option as well. If you mouse over geometry, you'll see the constraints pop up. So you can select them on the fly by mousing over it. So, all right, so now I want to extrude. Very simple. I've finished my sketch. I'm ready to take this and turn it into a 3D part. We're going to select the extrude command. Okay. I always rotate the part just a bit, make sure it's going the right way, and I need to define a depth. Right? So I have extrude blind depth 25 millimeters. Now you can resize with the drag arrow, so I can dynamically resize things if I'd like. But of course, entering a value, I can get exactly what I want. So I enter the value, I hit the green check, and now I have my first extrude. And as I mentioned before, everything we do shows up in the feature list. So here's the first sketch, and there's the extrude created from it. Okay, so you'll see those two items there. If you needed to edit or change anything, you can do that in the right-click menu. So now we've created our first feature. Let's take this one step further. What I'd like to do is create another feature. Let's start a new sketch on the top plane. And in this case, I'm going to use keyboard shortcuts. So I use S to start the sketch and N to rotate normal to sketch plane. So as you start getting more into it, you'll start to use more and more of those keyboard shortcuts. So now I want to sketch a few lines. We'll start with a line tool, and I'll start just horizontal the origin here, and just draw a series of lines. Now what I'd like to do next is constrain a few of these. So we'll add a few dimensions here. Okay, a distance from the top edge of 9. We'll add an angle value here just between these two lines. Notice I don't go to a different tool, angle dimensions, using the same tool. And we'll enter 170. And the last thing I want is a dimension from the origin. That should be 20. All right, so I've defined this sketch largely just with a few simple dimensions, but notice, although it looks fully defined, the endpoints are blue. So I can left click and drag, and you'll notice that they extend on, they're not constrained. There's a few things that you can do. I can add dimensions and constrain it that way, but one thing I'd recommend is the use command. This is often referred to in many traditional CAD applications as the convert. But essentially what it does is it takes existing edges, faces, whatever, and it converts it to sketch geometry. And this is useful because I can select use, for instance, and convert the silhouette of these outside shapes to sketch geometry. And the reason that's so useful is then I can then attach my lines to that geometry. Right? So all kinds of neat things you can do with the use command. Very powerful tool I'd recommend here in the sketch toolbar. Now what I'd like to do is offset a few of these lines. And I can select the offset tool, and I can left click and drag the entity and get the entire chain, or I can select offset and select just the individual entities that I want to offset. So in this case, we'll select just these 3 lines and offset them. I can manually drag out the offset if I choose to. As soon as I left click though, it asks for a value. In this case, I want an offset of 8. Okay. So offsetting geometry is very simple. Select offset, select the entities you want to offset, and as soon as you left click to place it, you enter a value. So again, I want to extrude. We have our shape defined. I'll extrude. Now in this case, instead of extruding with a blind depth, I'm going to choose symmetric. And what that does is it extrudes in both directions, right? So if I rotate things around just a bit here, let's set this back to blind. Notice with a blind, it's only going in a single direction. Whereas if I turn on symmetric, it's extruding in equal distance both directions. Now, one last thing I want to point out is in Onshape, there isn't different commands for extrude, cut, for instance, versus extrude. Everything's built into the one extrude command. So you have new extrude, you can add an extrude to a part. Remove, often referred to as cut, is here as well. And then we also have this option for intersect. And this will give you only the two that intersect, only the two features that intersect between them, which gives us that angled dog bone link shape. Okay. So I can hit the green check, and now I have something closer to our finished part. Okay. Now, in the sake of time, I'm going to move on. There's a few features I could add. A lot of this is very similar to probably what a lot of users have seen. If you have exposure to traditional CAD, simple sketches and features are probably nothing new. We also have tools like, fillets and chamfers and shells, and they're applied in a very similar way, patterns and so on. For instance, a fillet, very simple. Select the fillet, select the radius size that you want, select the edge that you want to fillet. And you can select as many edges as you'd like, and it goes in and fillets that geometry. Okay. So chamfers, again, very similar. But the idea behind it is, this is a lot of this. It carries over from many, traditional CAD systems. What I'd like to cover next are some things that really make us unique. And one of the first is the sharing capabilities. So I mentioned before I wanted to show sharing. In the top right, you have the big share icon. So I can click share and I enter their email address. Right? As I mentioned before, they don't have to have an Onshape account. We create one on the fly for them. So even just enter their email address, even if they don't have an account, we create one and then send them a link saying, hey, so-and-so shared a document with you. Click here to sign in. An important step for you, enter their email address, define their permissions. Right? You have the ability to just say, I want, view only permissions, where they can view the document and that's it, or view and comment, where they can add comments. And of course, edit, and then edit and share allows them to also share your document with others. So important thing, make sure to define your permissions and then hit share. Okay. As soon as you do that, they get instant access to the model, right? So they don't have to install anything. They don't have to download anything. They can click a link and they're looking at the same model you are. You can even work together in real time. So now we can work on the same model at the same time. In fact, you'll notice some visual cues here. So I see a little C here that indicates someone else is in my document. I can see new feature was created by that person. So I get real-time updates that something is happening to my part right now, right? So really powerful stuff, real-time collaboration between users, definitely something that users have been asking for a long time, and it's just not possible with traditional CAD. And you'll see, notice that, I've now, that person that I've invited now has added a shell to the part, right? So because I gave them edit permissions, they can also edit, and we can work together. So if you have 100 parts in your assembly, you can have 2 or 3 people put them together instead of just one. So real-time collaboration between users. I can even see his screen in real time by double-clicking on it, and then I can look at what's going on his screen live. So great way to point something out if I want to point out a hole, for instance, or a pocket that's too small. Great way to highlight things. I've already mentioned this as well, but you also have comment capabilities. So you can chat back and forth between each other in the document. So definitely some neat stuff. Real-time collaboration between users is a huge one because I can see, I don't have to worry about checking in or checking out or who has right access and all those details, all that goes away. All right, some questions, forgive me. is not actually fillet. Sometimes when we fillet, I can see that the fillet line is not actually a fillet. Forgive me, I'm not sure I totally understand. The fillet line, if you don't see a preview, that often means the fillet fails, and if you hit the green check and the fillet turns red, that means it fails. It sounds like it may be failing in that case, but forgive me. All right, so let's get into it. Now, I have just a few minutes left. I know I've run just a little bit long, so forgive me. I want to take this and assemble it. So we've built a simple part. What about motion? What about assemblies and all those details? As I mentioned before, assemblies are just another tab. So I can flip over to a different tab, and now I have the bike frame assembly, and this is where I test motion, right? So where I assemble everything and move it around and see if I have any collisions. So real quickly, I'm going to start with the insert command. I'll select insert, very first icon in the toolbar, and I browse to the part I'd like to insert. Now, real simple, we're going to go all the way down here to our part that we model, select it, and then left click in empty graphics to place it. Right? It's important to point out that when you first place this, it's not constrained in any way. So you'll notice if I just left click and drag, this thing moves around. You can left click on it and get a triad and even spin it. So if you want a little bit more control, rotate it a certain amount, or if I want to rotate about an x-axis, for example, just left click and use that triad to manipulate. But in the end, you want to add mates. How do I mate this thing to my assembly, right? This thing belongs down here attached and needs to be able to swivel and rotate. So that's when we get into mates. Now, mates, the key to it is, what's your degree of freedom? Is it fixed? Is it rotating? Is it move in and out? And so there's some tips that I have for the new user to help learn the different mate types. But let's get started. Let's just say, for example, I want to attach the end of this link that we built right to the frame here. And I want it to be able to rotate. It needs to be able to pivot. So we have a few different mate types, and the thing that's unique about Onshape is we don't use things like faces necessarily to reference simple mates. We use what we call mate connectors, and you can think of a mate connector as a point on each part, and we take these points, we bring them together, and your mate type defines the degrees of freedom that you have. And the idea behind this is you can take something that could be 2 or 3 mates in a traditional CAD application and boil it down to 1. So an example I always like to give is I need to attach this to this. In a traditional CAD application, that might be 2 mates, something to align the 2 holes, something to bring the 2 faces together. With Onshape, that's 1 revolute mate. Right? So I select revolute. As soon as I select the mate and I start moving my cursor around, notice I get these mate connectors that appear. And they look like little coordinate systems, little white dots with coordinate systems attached. And think of it as a point. So I want to take this point on that link and I want to attach it to this point on the frame. Right? Now, some tips. When you're first getting started, understanding all the different mate types can be difficult, but a tip is you can try different mate types out and then hit the play icon to see how much movement you get. So if you're curious, how much can this thing move, hit play and it'll animate the degrees of freedom, and then you can try a different mate. So I can say, okay, well, let's take a look at what the cylindrical mate does. So I hit cylindrical, play, and notice now it spins and it moves in and out. So 1 more degree of freedom. So you can play with the different mate types, hit play, and see what it does, and you learn a lot about the different mates that way. All right, so I've got my mate. In this case, it should be a revolute. I'll hit the green check, and I've got 1 down, right? So this link is attached. If I left click and drag, notice it rotates about that point that I attached it to, but it's still not attached to the swing arm here, so I need to add that mate. For this, we'll use a cylindrical mate, and I'll attach the end of this link, right at the center of that hole, to the end of this arm. Okay. Notice at first that it only solves for the active mate, so it looks as though it's broken this mate. You can hit solve, and it solves for all the mates in the assembly. Right? So I get the correct behavior, I hit the green check, and now I've attached my swing arm in both places. And of course, the main goal, the main test is to left click and drag and see your motion. right? So assemblies are all about motion, and once you get everything assembled, you can start to figure out, is it working like I'd expect? So that is assemblies. I know I'm going rather quickly here, so again, forgive me. One last thing for those that want to stick around for a few extra minutes. Drawings, very simple. Creating a new drawing, you can go to the Create tab, Create Drawing. Choose your template. Now, there are a few different options for templates. A lot of them are generic Onshape templates. You can even use your own if you have your own. I'd recommend using one of the Onshape just to get started if you don't have your own. And then choose a template, right? We can choose ISO A4, let's say, green check, or excuse me, OK, and it creates a new tab. So here I have a new blank drawing. Right? Now, the key things to keep in mind, again, it's just another tab in your document, but you can insert views, right? The first thing it'll prompt you to do is choose what views do you want to insert. Let's choose the part 1 that we built, and then we'll drop in a front view. I can project off of that and create a top and a right, and even an isometric in the corner. And then I can go in if I wanted detail views, section views, even a few dimensions here. Real simply, again, all I'm doing is left-clicking the command, left-click to actually place the entity. In this case, simple dimensions, for example, very easy to do. So we've run out of time. I just wanted to mention that, it's just another tab in your document. You can go to the Create tab menu, Create Drawing, choose your template, and it creates a new blank drawing. Then you can start inserting all the views and title block info and details associated with it. So that's really what I had planned for you today. Again, I realize I've run just a bit long. I'm going to stick around and answer any questions that you have. So I know I haven't answered a few. Forgive me. But just going forward, if you're just getting started in Onshape, I really encourage you to try Onshape in your professional work and let us know what you think. There's a feedback mechanism. Really encourage your feedback. Let us know, what you think of Onshape, what it is that you need to get your work done. Also invite others. I've shown you the invite command. I showed you the share, how to share your documents. Very easy to do. And a lot of the collaborative benefits come from, sharing your documents. So definitely worth trying out. If you haven't already attended a user group, maybe you're interested in running your own user group, establishing a local user group, let us know. We'd love to help you get things up and running and get your user group started. So that's what I had planned. I know there are a few questions, so forgive me. I'm going to stick around and answer them, but that's it. Thank you, everyone, for coming.